The ocean is vast, unpredictable, and at times, completely unforgiving. For centuries, ships have set sail, only to vanish into the abyss, never to be seen again. Entire crews disappear without a trace. Vessels are found eerily abandoned, with meals still set on tables. Some ships reappear decades later, drifting silently with no sign of life. From massive freighters swallowed whole by the sea to ghost ships that seem to defy logic, these are the true stories of maritime mysteries that remain unsolved to this day. These aren't myths or sailors' tales. They're all real, and they've left behind nothing but unanswered questions. So, settle in, get comfy, and let's journey into the unknown. Because once we set sail on this voyage, there's no turning back. Off the rugged coast of Vancouver Island, where the Pacific Ocean crashes against jagged cliffs, there's a stretch of water sailors have feared for generations. A place where storms rise without warning, where the waves can swallow ships whole. It's known as the graveyard of the Pacific, and among the many vessels lost there, few are as infamous as the SS Valencia. Built in 1882, the Valencia was a steamship designed for coastal travel, ferrying passengers and cargo between San Francisco, Seattle, and Alaska. She wasn't the grandest ship of her time, nor the most luxurious, but she was reliable. That is, until one stormy night in January 1906, when she set out on what would become her final, doomed voyage. On January 20th, the Valencia departed San Francisco, bound for Seattle, with 108 passengers and crew aboard. The weather was rough from the start, but no one expected disaster until the ship veered off course in the dead of night. Navigating blindly through the thick fog, she struck a reef just off the coast of Vancouver Island. The impact was devastating. Water poured into the hull, flooding the lower decks within minutes. Panic took hold. The crew rushed to lower lifeboats, but the raging surf made escape nearly impossible. Many of the boats capsized immediately, tossing desperate passengers into the freezing ocean. Others simply disappeared into the darkness, never to be seen again. As the ship slowly broke apart, survivors clung to the rigging, watching helplessly as wave after wave tore the Valencia to pieces. For the few lifeboats that made it away, the nightmare wasn't over. Some drifted for days before being found, while others vanished entirely. Rescuers arrived nearly a full day later, but by then, the Valencia was all but gone. Of the 108 people aboard, only 37 survived. The rest were claimed by the sea. The SS Valencia remains one of the most chilling maritime disasters in history. A ship swallowed by the graveyard of the Pacific, leaving behind whispers of something more than just tragedy, something that lingers in the cold, unforgiving waters. But this is just the first of many mysteries, because when it comes to ships lost at sea, some stories are even stranger. Before we dive into the next mystery, just a quick note. While the visuals in this video will provide extra context, they aren't necessary to enjoy the stories. Feel free to let this play in the background while you work, relax, or even fall asleep to these eerie, unsolved maritime mysteries. And if you'd like to support the channel and help us continue making these deep dive videos, subscribe our channel. Now, let's get back to the mysteries. Our second case is that of the High Aim 6, a ghost ship found drifting aimlessly in the vast waters of the Pacific. A modern mystery that defies explanation, not because of how it was lost, but because of what was left behind. The High Aim 6 was a modest Taiwanese fishing vessel designed for long journeys out at sea. In late 2002, it left the port of Liuqiu, Taiwan, with a crew of 10, including its experienced captain, Chen Tai-chung. Their mission was simple: catch fish and return home. But weeks passed, and no word came from the crew. By January 2003, the vessel had missed its scheduled check-ins, and concern grew. But out in the open ocean, where ships vanish without a trace all the time, a delayed return wasn't unheard of. Then, on January 8, 2003, an Australian Coast Guard patrol spotted a lone fishing boat drifting over 800 miles off the coast of Western Australia. The ship's name was clearly visible. High Aim 6, but something was wrong. There was no sign of life on board. The High Aim 6 had no apparent damage. No distress signals had been sent. The engine was in working order, and the fuel tanks were full. The ship was in perfect condition, except for the fact that it had been completely abandoned. When Australian authorities boarded the vessel, they found the ship's supplies untouched. Personal belongings were still in the crew quarters. The logbook was missing, but the rest of the vessel looked like it had been left in a hurry. In the storage areas, fresh fish lay packed neatly in ice, as if the crew had been in the middle of their work before suddenly disappearing. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that the crew had been forced to leave, and yet all 10 men had vanished. Authorities investigated every possibility. If the ship had been attacked by pirates, why was nothing stolen? If something mechanical had gone wrong, why was the engine still operational? There were no signs of fire, no evidence of a rogue wave or storm. The High Aim 6 was still floating, fully intact. The only clue came when authorities traced one of the missing crew members, an Indonesian fisherman named Supriyanto. When located in Indonesia, he offered a vague and unsettling explanation. He claimed the rest of the crew were murdered in a mutiny, leaving the High Aim 6 adrift. But why? And where had they gone? Supriyanto never gave a full explanation, and authorities were left without answers. Some speculated that a mutiny had occurred, with the crew taking a lifeboat and disappearing into the ocean. But if that were true, where did they go? No lifeboats from the High Aim 6 were ever recovered. Another theory suggests that the crew may have been involved in illegal fishing or smuggling and had deliberately abandoned the vessel to cover their tracks. But again, there was no hard evidence to prove it. With no conclusive answers, the High Aim 6 was eventually towed back to Taiwan, where investigators examined it for months. No new leads emerged, and the fate of the crew remains one of the most baffling maritime disappearances in modern history. A perfectly functional ship, drifting alone with no sign of struggle. A crew that vanished without a trace, leaving behind only silence. The High Aim 6 has become one of the most unsettling ghost ship cases of the 21st century. A mystery that might never be solved, but it's far from the only ship to be found eerily abandoned, because sometimes the ocean doesn't take the ship, it just takes the people. And our next story is even stranger. Before we dive into the next mystery, take a moment to consider the eerie silence of the High Aim 6, a ship adrift, a crew gone, and no answers in sight. What could have happened out there in the vast emptiness of the Pacific? Stay with us as we explore another chilling tale of the sea, one that involves a ship that didn't just vanish, but left behind a trail of questions that still haunt us today. The ocean has a way of swallowing ships whole, leaving behind nothing but questions. Some vanish in the dead of night, others send distress calls that cut off mid-sentence. But few disappearances are as baffling or as controversial as that of the Marine Sulphur Queen, a vessel that set out on a routine voyage and was never seen again. No survivors, no wreckage, just an eerie silence that still lingers today. Built in 1944 as a T2 tanker, the Marine Sulphur Queen was originally designed to carry oil during World War II, but after the war, she was converted into something far more volatile, a liquid sulfur carrier. The modification was simple: a few structural changes, reinforced tanks, and suddenly, a ship once meant to transport fuel was now hauling molten sulfur at nearly 275 degrees Fahrenheit. The conversion allowed for greater efficiency in transporting industrial materials, but it also introduced significant risks. The ship's design had never been intended to carry such cargo, and some experts would later argue that this change may have sealed its fate. On February 2nd, 1963, the Marine Sulphur Queen departed from Beaumont, Texas, carrying over 15,000 tons of molten sulfur. She was bound for Norfolk, Virginia, on a route that would take her through the Straits of Florida, skirting along the infamous Bermuda Triangle. The ship was 523 feet long, with a crew of 39 men, all experienced sailors, many of whom had made this trip multiple times before. There was nothing unusual about the departure, no signs of distress, no warnings of what was to come. 3 days later, On February 4th, a routine radio transmission was sent from the ship near Key West. It was a standard position report, confirming everything was going according to plan. But this would be the last message ever received from the Marine Sulphur Queen. After that, silence. When the ship failed to arrive in Norfolk on schedule, the alarm was raised. The Coast Guard immediately launched an extensive search, covering more than 350,000 square miles of open ocean. They searched for wreckage, lifeboats, oil slicks, anything that might indicate what had happened. After weeks of searching, they found almost nothing. No hull fragments, no major debris, just a few pieces of life preservers, an oil slick, and some debris that could have come from any vessel. The absence of wreckage made the case even stranger. A ship that size, carrying that much cargo, should have left some evidence behind. But it was as if the Marine Sulphur Queen had simply ceased to exist. No distress signals were ever received, no emergency flares were spotted, and no reports came from passing ships of anything unusual in the area. Theories about what happened began circulating almost immediately. One of the most widely accepted explanations is that the ship suffered a catastrophic structural failure. Even before its disappearance, the Marine Sulphur Queen had been known to have serious maintenance issues. The ship's hull was already old and had developed cracks due to years of strain. Some former crew members had even reported feeling uneasy about the ship's condition, with one sailor describing it as a disaster waiting to happen. If the hull had given way, the results would have been devastating. A breach in the tanks holding the molten sulfur could have triggered an explosion or an uncontrolled fire. The intense heat of the sulfur, combined with exposure to water, could have created deadly steam and gas, overwhelming the crew before they had time to react. If this happened suddenly enough, the ship could have sunk within minutes, leaving no time for distress calls or lifeboat deployment. Another theory suggests that the ship may have fallen victim to unpredictable weather. The waters near the Florida Straits are notorious for sudden storms and rogue waves, which have been known to take down even the most well-built vessels. A massive wave striking an already weakened hull could have caused the ship to break apart and sink almost instantly, with the sulfur dispersing and sinking rapidly into the deep ocean. Then, of course, there are those who believe that something stranger happened. The Marine Sulphur Queen disappeared along the edge of the Bermuda Triangle, a region infamous for unexplained vanishings. While the Bermuda Triangle's reputation is often exaggerated, there's no denying that the area has seen an unusually high number of maritime and aviation disappearances. Could electromagnetic anomalies have interfered with the ship's navigation? Could something else entirely be at play? While these ideas are often dismissed as speculative, the lack of conclusive evidence has only fueled the mystery. The case took an even more tragic turn when the families of the lost crew members began pushing for answers. Many felt that the ship's owner, the Marine Transport Lines Company, had been negligent in keeping the vessel seaworthy. In the years that followed, a legal battle ensued, with lawsuits alleging that the company had knowingly allowed an unsafe ship to operate. In 1964, the Coast Guard released its official report, stating that the most likely cause of the disaster was structural failure. They determined that the Marine Sulphur Queen was in poor condition and that its modifications to carry sulfur had made it even more vulnerable to disaster. But without wreckage or concrete evidence, they stopped short of definitively stating what had happened. Decades later, the Marine Sulphur Queen remains one of the most baffling disappearances in maritime history. No remains of the crew were ever found. No wreckage large enough to provide answers has ever surfaced. And despite technological advancements in underwater exploration, the ship's final resting place remains unknown. For many, the story of the Marine Sulphur Queen is a cautionary tale, a reminder of how dangerous the sea can be and how easily a routine voyage can turn into tragedy. For others, it's an unsolved mystery, a ghost ship lost to time, waiting beneath the waves to be discovered. But one thing is certain, the Marine Sulphur Queen didn't simply vanish into thin air. Somewhere in the vast, dark ocean, the truth is waiting to be found. The ocean has claimed countless ships, but some disappearances are more unsettling than than others. Some leave behind wreckage, a final distress call, or some clue as to what happened. But then there are cases like the Webcast 2, a vessel found completely intact, drifting aimlessly across the waves, yet with no sign of its crew. No signs of struggle, no distress signals, just an eerie, abandoned yacht moving with the current. Stay with us as we explore this chilling tale next. On April 15th, 2000, the Cast 2, a 32-foot catamaran, set sail from Eerie Beach, Queensland, Australia. The boat was manned by 3 experienced sailors, skipper Derek Batten, aged 56, and his 2 friends, Peter and James Tunstead, aged 69 and 63. The trio had planned a leisurely journey along the northeastern coast, heading towards the coastal city of Townsville before continuing to Western Australia. They were all seasoned seafarers, accustomed to the unpredictability of the ocean. There was nothing particularly dangerous about their planned route, and the weather forecast was clear. Just 3 days after their departure, on April 18th, a surveillance aircraft spotted the Cast 2 drifting near the Great Barrier Reef, roughly 88 nautical miles from Townsville. Something was clearly wrong. The yacht was moving with the wind, its sails flapping loosely, and no one appeared to be on board. Concerned authorities dispatched a rescue team to board the vessel. When they arrived, what they found was chilling. The Cast 2 was in near-perfect condition. The engine was still running. A laptop was open, still powered on. A meal had been prepared in the galley, untouched. The table was set, as if the men had planned to sit down for lunch at any moment. 3 life jackets were still on board, unused. Even more disturbingly, all of the men's personal belongings, including their wallets and passports, were still neatly stored on the boat, but there was no sign of the crew. The only thing out of place was some minor damage to the sail. Apart from that, it was as if the 3 men had simply evaporated into thin air. Authorities launched an extensive search operation, scouring the surrounding ocean for any trace of Batten and the Tunstead brothers. But no bodies were ever found. No distress calls had been sent. No emergency beacons had been activated. So what could have possibly happened? One of the leading theories suggests that the men were swept overboard by a sudden rogue wave or strong gust of wind. If one of them had fallen in, the others might have instinctively tried to save him, only to be pulled in themselves. If this happened quickly enough, the yacht could have continued drifting on its own before anyone had a chance to climb back aboard. But if that were the case, why hadn't they grabbed life jackets? And why had no one managed to hold on to the vessel? Another theory involves the boat's fishing gear. When investigators examined the yacht, they found a fishing line trailing behind it. Some have speculated that one of the men may have been reeling in a catch when he fell overboard. The others may have rushed to his aid, only to be pulled into the water themselves. In a tragic twist, if the yacht was still moving at a steady speed, even a short distance from the boat could have been enough to make climbing back aboard impossible. A more unusual theory suggests a sudden medical emergency. Could one of the men have suffered a heart attack or stroke, causing a panic that led to all 3 ending up in the water? Without an eyewitness account, there's no way to know. And then, of course, there are the wilder theories, stories of foul play, mysterious sea creatures, or even something paranormal. But as intriguing as those ideas may be, no real evidence supports them. In the end, the disappearance of the Cast 2 remains one of the most baffling maritime mysteries in recent history. 3 experienced sailors vanished without a trace, leaving behind a perfectly functioning boat that should have carried them safely to their destination. Was it a tragic accident? A freak wave? A desperate attempt to save a friend that cost all 3 their lives? Whatever the truth may be, the Cast 2 still drifts in the minds of those who hear its story. A ghost ship with no clear answer, lost in the vast emptiness of the sea.